The world stopped celebrating the sunrise. Why would it when sleep had become an inconvenience? Nocturne, they called it. A sleek silver pill developed by Eterna Labs, promising 8 hours of perfect rest compressed into one. Productivity soared. Markets never closed. Mankind had conquered the night. But in the gleaming chrome towers of the city, a new affliction was whispered about. Chronosomnia. Users reported lost hours. They would be brewing coffee. And in the span of a blink, the mug would be empty, the kitchen clock suddenly 3 hours ahead. They weren't moving through time. Their perception of it was shattering. For Mark Rossi, Nocturne was fuel. It gave him the 23-hour days needed to climb the corporate ladder at his law firm. He lived on caffeine and ambition until the echoes began. He would reach for his pen, only to see a shimmering, translucent imprint of his own hand already grasping it. In the polished reflection of his office window, he'd watch himself turn his head, a full second before he actually felt the impulse to move. The lost hours were one thing. They were gaps. But these were overlaps. Reality was buffering, and Mark was terrified that at any moment he wouldn't just see the echo. He would become it. He was losing control, not of his mind, but of his when, and someone was watching him. It was 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, or perhaps a Wednesday. Mark Rossi had stopped checking. His world had shrunk to the pressurized cabin of his corner office, a gleaming cage of glass and steel, suspended 50 stories above a city that never slept. Below him, the lights of automated transports wove silent electric threads through the canyons of the financial district. Inside, the only sound was the sterile hum of the air filtration system and the frantic tapping of his own fingers on the holographic keyboard. He was drowning. A sea of digital documents flooded his displays, contracts, and depositions, demanding his immediate, unwavering attention. The Harrison merger was threatening to collapse, and he was the only associate trusted to find the microscopic loophole that would save the firm millions. His ambition demanded he find it. His biology demanded he collapse. His desk was a graveyard of empty caffeine-infused nutrient packs. Exhaustion was a physical weight, a cold, heavy blanket pressing him into his ergonomic chair. He looked at the box, sleek, silver, and colder than the glass surrounding him. Eterna Labs, Nocturne. The name was whispered in the firm's washrooms and private lounges like a secret password. Eterna promised what gods and nature could not. The compression of life's most profound inefficiency. 8 hours of perfect restorative sleep, condensed into one. He had resisted for weeks. It felt like a violation, but as he stared at the glowing red deadline on his terminal, 6 a.m. final submission, he knew his resistance was a luxury he could no longer afford. Ambition won. It always did. The pill was tiny, a teardrop of polished obsidian. He dry swallowed it. There was no taste. He set his terminal alarm for 4:30 a.m., giving himself a generous 90 minutes. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and waited for the familiar, gentle drift of unconsciousness. It never came. There was no drift. There was no transition. One moment, he was aware of the hum of the server rack in the wall. The next, a violent digital chime ripped him back to awareness. He sat bolt upright. 4:30 a.m. His mouth was dry, but his mind was sharp. Not just awake. It was honed. The fog of fatigue was gone, evaporated. He felt a clean, cold, surging clarity, as if his brain had been taken out, chemically cleaned and slotted back into place. He looked at the Harrison merger documents. The loophole he had spent 12 agonizing hours searching for practically leapt off the screen. A subtle contradiction in Clause 22A. By 5:45 a.m., he had redrafted the entire compliance brief. By 7 a.m., when the first junior partners were arriving, bleary-eyed and clutching coffees, Mark was emailing his third completed file of the morning. The next few weeks were a revelation. Mark Rossi became a legend. He was a machine. He billed 100-hour weeks and still had time to mentor junior associates. He didn't just win cases. He anticipated and dismantled them before they began. He was the first in the office and the last to leave, yet he always looked energized, his eyes bright with an unsettling, synthetic focus. His colleagues looked at him with a mixture of awe and envy. Nocturne was his armor, his weapon, his cheat code for life. The first crack in his perfect new world was almost imperceptibly small. He was in a conference call with the London office. A senior partner was asking him a complex question about jurisdictional arbitrage. Mark opened his mouth to reply, based on the precedent set in. He blinked. He was now in the elevator, descending to the lobby. The call was over. His digital notebook confirmed the meeting had concluded successfully 45 minutes ago. He had no memory of the conversation, not a single word. He stared at his reflection in the polished steel door. He felt a dizzying, hollow lurch in his stomach. He shook his head, blaming it on low blood sugar. It happened again. He stepped into a taxi at the firm, telling the automated guidance system his home address. He leaned his head against the window, watching the neon-drenched rain of the city. The sensation was not of falling asleep, but of a brief, sudden stillness. He blinked again. The taxi was parked. The meter was off. "We've been here for a minute, sir," the driver's synthesized voice announced from the dashboard. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs. The trip from his office to his apartment was, even with automated traffic, at least 20 minutes. He looked at his watch. The time was correct. 20 minutes had passed. He just hadn't been present for them. He dismissed it, rationalized it. It was the price of hyper-focus. When you operate at his level, the mind becomes ruthlessly efficient. It simply prunes the mundane, the transitions, the static between moments of importance. The commute, the small talk. It wasn't a loss. It was an optimization. That night, standing in his sterile white kitchen, he held the small, dark pill. He felt the phantom sensation of the lost 20 minutes, a tiny gap in the fabric of his day. A shiver of something he refused to name ran down his spine. He looked at the mountain of case files waiting for him on his home terminal. He swallowed the pill and welcomed the clean, perfect 1-hour void. The optimizations began to fray. The gaps in his perception were no longer clean cuts. They were jagged tears. Mark would be standing in his kitchen, and in the space of a heartbeat, he would find himself in his living room, with no memory of crossing the space between. He'd find emails in his sent folder, complex, brilliantly argued emails that he had no recollection of composing. His life, once a meticulously curated timeline, was becoming a series of disconnected snapshots. But he was winning. The Harrison merger was a success, and his name was being whispered for a junior partnership. The price, he told himself, was manageable. The real terror began on a Thursday night. He was working late as always. The office was a tomb of silent, darkened terminals. He stood, stretching, and glanced at his own reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights far below were a static, jeweled carpet. His reflection smiled. Mark froze. He hadn't smiled. He was feeling a dull throb of a tension headache. He stared, unblinking. His reflection, a perfect high-fidelity mirror of himself, raised its right hand and loosened its tie. Mark's own hand was still at his side. He felt a sudden, cold impulse, a neurological command to loosen his tie. He watched, horrified, as his physical hand slowly rose, perfectly mimicking the action his reflection had completed a full 2 seconds prior. He stumbled back, knocking a stack of briefs from his desk. He was breathing hard. It was a hallucination, fatigue, stress, it had to be. He was just tired. Even Nocturne couldn't eliminate all stress. He went to his desk to sign a concluding affidavit. His hand hovered over the paper. He saw it before he felt it, a shimmering, translucent imprint of his hand, like heat haze rising from a road. This echo grasped the pen. He watched, frozen, as the spectral signature flowed across the line. The air shimmered, and then his real hand, moving with a dreadful, automated certainty, grasped the pen and traced the exact signature. A perfect, horrifying overlay. He wasn't signing. He was tracing his own future. This was not optimization. This was a fracture. That night, for the first time in 2 months, he did not take the pill. He locked it in his desk drawer, determined to purge the chemical from his system, to reclaim his linear reality. It was the worst night of his life. Sleep, real sleep, would not come. But the alternative was not a clean, sharp wakefulness. It was a thick, agonizing temporal mud. The withdrawal was a distortion of the highest order. The seconds on his alarm clock didn't tick. They crawled. Each one stretched into an agonizing eternity. He felt trapped in the space between the moments. The hum of his refrigerator slowed to a deep guttural groan. He tried to walk to the kitchen, and the journey felt like crossing a desert. His thoughts, usually so fast and clear, were now syrupy, disconnected, and loud. And the echoes. Without the pill's focus, the echoes were everywhere. He saw himself sit down, stand up, and open the refrigerator, all at the same time. His apartment was filled with translucent, flickering ghosts of his own immediate past and future, all moving at different, incompatible speeds. He was trapped in an agonizing, chaotic replay of his own existence. It was a crushing, unbearable weight of temporal confusion. He lasted until 4:08 a.m. He was sobbing, not from sadness, but from a profound sensory overload. He couldn't exist in a world that wouldn't move. He fumbled in his bag for his emergency vial. He dry swallowed the tiny dark pill. The relief was instantaneous and profound. The agonizing temporal drag ceased. The world snapped back into its correct rhythm. The crawling seconds began to tick. The overlapping echoes faded, resolving back into one solid reality. The cold, beautiful clarity of Nocturne flooded his mind, but it was a tainted victory. As he straightened his tie, his hands shaking, he knew he was trapped. He could not live with the drug, and he absolutely could not live without it. He looked at the echo in the mirror, the one that was now perfectly in sync. It stared back, and for a fleeting second its expression wasn't his. It was one of cold, calculating pity. Mark picked up his terminal. He couldn't go to a hospital. He couldn't let the firm know. There was only one place to go. He navigated to the Eterna Labs corporate portal and requested a routine diagnostic and follow-up with the Nocturne clinical team. He masked the terror in his voice, affecting the calm, satisfied tone of a successful client. He needed to see the creators of this perfect, terrible miracle. He needed to meet the people who had broken time. Eterna Labs was not a tower of glass and steel. It was hidden, nestled in a quiet, heavily wooded campus outside the city's automated transport ring. The architecture was stark, white, and low to the ground, suggesting correctly that most of the facility was subterranean. The lobby was silent. It was not the respectful hush of a law firm, but a profound acoustic deadness that seemed to absorb sound. It smelled of sterilized air and faint, unrecognizable chemicals. Mark sat on a molded plastic chair, trying to control his breathing. He had rehearsed this meeting. He was a lawyer. He would present his symptoms as damages, violations of the user agreement. He would be calm, firm, and demand a counteragent. He was already failing. An echo of his hand, translucent and shimmering, was tapping an anxious rhythm on his knee. His physical hand was perfectly still. "Mr. Rossi," Mark flinched. A panel in the wall, perfectly flush and invisible a moment before, had slid open. Dr. Elena Ivanova stood in the opening. She was slight, with pale, severe features and hair pulled back into a tight bun. She wore a simple white lab coat, and her eyes, the color of a winter sky, held no warmth, only a bright, piercing, analytical curiosity. She was looking at him not as a patient, but as a theorem she was about to solve. "Your cortisol levels are elevated," she stated, not as a question but as a fact. "Please come." The room she led him to was not a medical office. It was an observation chamber. A single complex chair sat in the center, facing a wall-sized screen that was currently dark. "I've been monitoring your usage logs," she said, her voice clipped and precise with a slight Eastern European accent. "Your productivity metrics are extraordinary. You are our most successful subject." "I'm not here about productivity," Mark said, his voice tighter than he'd intended. "I'm here about the side effects. Your gift of time is defective." He laid out his case, the words tumbling out. "The lost hours, the gaps in memory, the horrific predictive echoes. I'm seeing my reflection move before I do. I'm tracing my own signature," he finished, his voice raw. "Your drug is breaking my mind. I want a cure. I want it flushed from my system." Dr. Ivanova listened. She showed no alarm, no sympathy, no surprise. She didn't even take notes. When he was finished, she simply tilted her head. "Side effects," she mused, the words tasting foreign. "A misnomer. We prefer the term emergent properties." She tapped a console. The massive screen flickered to life. It displayed 2 high-resolution scans of a human brain, pulsing with neurological activity. On the left, she said, gesturing with a sleek stylus, is a baseline human consciousness. Notice the activity in the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. These are your great filters. They take the chaotic, infinite storm of raw sensory data and force it into a comprehensible, linear sequence. Cause and effect, past, present, future. It is a survival mechanism, evolved to help an ape hunt on a savanna. Primitive but useful delusion. A delusion? Mark felt a prickle of cold dread. Of course. Ivanova pointed to the second scan. It was awash with light. Entire quadrants that were dark on the baseline model were blazing with incandescent energy. This is your brain, Mr. Rossi, taken just yesterday during your 4 p.m. deposition. Mark felt sick. She had been watching him. Nocturne is not a sedative, Ivanova explained, her voice dropping with an almost religious fervor. It is a neurochemical key. It is dissolving the very filters that chain your perception to the present. What are you talking about? Mark shot to his feet. Fix me. Fix you? Ivanova looked genuinely amused. We exist in 4 dimensions, Mr. Rossi. 3 of space, 1 of time. But our minds are blind. We are like worms crawling along a single line on a vast 3-dimensional landscape, convinced that line is the entire universe. But the landscape, all of time, exists simultaneously. The past, the future, it is all just there. Eterna Labs was founded to break that blindness. She stepped closer, her pale eyes unflinching. The echoes you see? The pre-actions in the mirror? You are not hallucinating. Your consciousness, unshackled, is catching glimpses of the terrain. You are not imagining your future actions. You are perceiving them. Your mind is beginning to unstick from the tyrannical now. A horrifying realization dawned on Mark. This wasn't a clinic. It was an experiment, and he was the subject. You. This is intentional, he whispered. The withdrawal, the agony when I stopped, the mind fighting to return to its comfortable linear prison, she finished. But the prison is breaking. You are the pioneer, Mark, the first to truly cross over. She stood before him, the avatar of cold, relentless science. You are not ill. You are simply learning to see all of time all at once. Mark stood frozen in the observation room, the blood roaring in his ears. Dr. Ivanova's words hung in the sterile air. You are simply learning to see all of time. It was not a diagnosis. It was a sentence. He was a test animal in a cage he hadn't known existed. You're insane, he breathed, backing away. This is unethical. It's monstrous, is it? Ivanova's expression remained one of placid, scientific inquiry. Was it monstrous to discover fire? To split the atom? We are offering mankind the keys to its own perception. You are simply frightened by the size of the room you've just entered. You are not the first, Mr. Rossi. You are merely the most coherent. She gestured to another seamless panel in the wall. Come, there is one other I'd like you to meet. Our true pioneer. Mark's legs felt like lead, but some horrifying, morbid curiosity, the same ambition that led him to the pill, pulled him forward. He had to see what he was becoming. The panel slid open to reveal a different kind of room. It was circular, the walls a soft matte white and had no furniture. Just a single man sitting on the padded floor, his back to them, seemingly staring at the blank wall. He was older, dressed in simple white scrubs. Subject 0, Ivanova announced as if presenting a prized specimen. He has been on a regulated nocturne derivative for 7 years. His perception is fully unbound. The man did not turn. Mark, his lawyer's mind grasping for any procedure, said, I'm Mark Rossi. Before he could finish, the man on the floor spoke, his voice a dry, papery rustle. I'm so sorry about the fire, Mark stopped. He looked at Ivanova. Fire? What fire? Ivanova simply watched, her hands clasped. The man, the timekeeper, slowly turned his head. His eyes were the most terrible thing Mark had ever seen. They were not blind, nor were they insane. They were simply unfocused. They darted left and right, up and down, as if tracking 1,000 invisible objects moving at impossible speeds. He was seeing everything all at once. He looked through Mark. It's the blue one, the keeper whispered, a faint smile on his lips. You always did like the blue one. That's why you chose it this morning. Mark's blood ran cold. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, but his tie was a stark cornflower blue. How did you know that? Mark said, his voice trembling. He felt a sudden paranoid thought. My God, is this what I'm going to become? A rambling broken oracle? The timekeeper's unfocused eyes snapped directly to Mark's. No, not broken, he said, his voice suddenly clear and sharp, perfectly answering Mark's internal monologue. Just open, very, very open. And you won't, you'll be much faster. She made yours much stronger. Mark stumbled back, clutching his chest. He can't. He's not reading my mind. Of course not, Ivanova said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. He isn't hearing your thoughts, Mark. He is remembering them. To him, this conversation, your thoughts, your surprise, it has all already happened. He is merely recalling it, like you would recall what you ate for breakfast. Mark stared at the old man, who was now frowning at a blank spot on the ceiling. It hurts, doesn't it? The keeper murmured more to himself. The first few times you see yourself. The echo, it's like a fingernail on glass. But you get used to it. Please, Mark begged, turning to the old man, ignoring Ivanova. If you've seen this, how do I stop it? How do I make it go back? The timekeeper's gaze drifted back to Mark. The clarity was gone, replaced by a swirling temporal confusion. He seemed to be speaking to Mark, to a child, and to someone in the distant past all at once. You can't go back, he whispered. You opened the door. You wanted the time. And the time wants you now. His eyes widened, the focus returning for one agonizing second of pure, undiluted terror. Be careful. They are watching. Who? Who's watching? From the gaps, the keeper hissed, his body tensing. The skips. The lost hours. You think they're empty? They're not empty. They're the places between the lines. They wait there. They hate the light. The new light in your head. The man's terror was infectious. Mark turned and lunged for the door. I'm leaving. I'm done. I'll sue this entire facility into the ground. Yes, you'll try, Ivanova said, not moving to stop him. Mark was about to shout at her when the timekeeper spoke one last time. His voice calm and conversational. Don't worry about the coffee, the old man said, looking at the wall again. The white floor in the atrium cleans very easily. She won't even be angry. Mark didn't know what that meant. He didn't care. He burst through the door, half running down the sterile white corridor back toward the lobby, his mind a symphony of panic. He ripped his access card from his pocket, fumbling with it as he neared the main atrium. Small, silent, automated service drone carrying refreshments glided around a corner. Mark, blinded by panic, collided with it. A styrofoam cup of coffee, a coffee he didn't even remember grabbing, flew from the drone's tray, splashing in a dark, ugly arc across the pristine, polished white floor. Mark froze. He stared at the stain. He heard the timekeeper's voice echo in his mind. Don't worry about the coffee. The white floor cleans very easily. He looked up. Dr. Ivanova was standing at the end of the hall, watching him. She wasn't angry. She was just observing. Mark Rossi returned to his life, but his life was no longer his. The drive back from Eterna Labs was a blur of newfound terror. He was a specimen, a pioneer, a man whose perception of reality was being deliberately unraveled. Every tick of his watch felt like a threat. Every reflective surface held the potential for a new, predictive horror. The timekeeper's words haunted him. I'm sorry about the fire. He found himself obsessively checking his apartment's fire extinguishers. His paranoia, a cold, constant hum beneath his skin. He could not stop taking Nocturne. The brief, agonizing attempt at withdrawal had proven that. He was chained to his cure, a cure that was actively dissolving the very foundations of his world. He was a prisoner of the present, forced to take a drug that destroyed it. He threw himself into his work, using the relentless 100-hour weeks as a shield against his own splintering mind. If he focused only on the next billable hour, perhaps he could ignore the fact that next was becoming a meaningless concept. The deposition for the Cyber Core Systems case was set for the following Tuesday. It was a high-stakes confrontation. Mark was facing Arthur Thorne, a ruthless veteran litigator known for his theatrics and his uncanny ability to produce last-minute, case-destroying evidence. Mark was in the conference room, surrounded by his team. He felt the familiar cold clarity of Nocturne in his veins. But something was wrong. The echoes were stronger. As he sipped his water, he saw a translucent version of his hand set the glass down 3 times in rapid, flickering succession. "Mark, are you with us?" his senior partner asked. Mark blinked. "Yes, sorry. Thorne's angle will be contractual non-compliance. We focus on the good faith clause." The deposition began. For 2 hours it was a brutal, meticulous grind. Thorne was, as predicted, a shark. He circled, he attacked. He questioned Mark's client with a condescending, theatrical pity. Mark held his ground, objecting, clarifying, protecting. But he was on the defensive. Then it happened. Thorne was leaning back in his chair, a smug smile on his face. "And yet, Mr. Davies," Thorne said to Mark's client, "you insist you had no knowledge of the server flaw. Is that your sworn testimony?" "Yes, it is," the client said. "A pity," Thorne said, reaching for his briefcase. "I was hoping you'd be more forthcoming." As Thorne's hand touched the latch, Mark's world tilted. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't an echo. It was a memory. A sudden, overwhelming and absolute sense of déjà vu for a moment that had not yet occurred. He remembered this clear as day. He remembered Thorne pulling out a bright red folder. He remembered the document inside, an internal email from his own client, dated 2 months prior with the subject line, "Potential back-end vulnerability." He remembered Thorne's triumphant cutting question. "Does this refresh your sworn testimony, Mr. Davies?" Mark's heart stopped. He was living this moment for the second time. Thorne's hand was still on the briefcase. He hadn't opened it yet. A cold, reptilian part of Mark's brain, the ambitious part, the part that loved Nocturne, took over. "It was a new, terrible power." "Objection," Mark said. His voice was calm, but his heart was a drum. Thorne paused, hand on the latch. "On what grounds, Mr. Rossi?" "I haven't even asked a question." "You're attempting to introduce evidence not provided during discovery," Mark said, his eyes locked on the briefcase. Thorne laughed. "You have no idea what I'm attempting, counselor, don't you?" Mark leaned forward. "You're about to produce a red folder. Inside it will be an email from my client, time-stamped August 14th, regarding a potential back-end vulnerability. You'll use it to impeach his testimony." The room went utterly silent. Mark's client stared at him, aghast. Thorne's smug smile evaporated, replaced by a mask of pale, stunned disbelief. His hand recoiled from the briefcase as if it were a snake. Mark pushed on, the cold alien power flowing through him. "You held that email back intentionally. It's a flagrant violation. If you so much as touch that latch again, I will move for immediate sanctions and have this entire deposition thrown out." Thorne was speechless. He was completely, utterly disarmed. His gotcha moment, the one he had built his entire case around, was gone. Thorne stammered. "This line of questioning is withdrawn." The rest of the deposition was a formality. Mark had won. He had shattered the opposition. As his team left the room, they slapped him on the back, their faces full of awe. "Mark, that was supernatural," his senior partner whispered. "How in God's name did you know?" Mark forced a smile. "Just a good read, I guessed." He locked himself in a washroom stall, his hands shaking so violently he could barely stand. He had done it. He hadn't just seen the future. He had used it. He had reached into tomorrow, stolen its contents and wielded them as a weapon. He looked at his reflection in the polished steel of the dispenser. The face that stared back was his, but the victory in its eyes felt cold, alien, and terrifying. He was living out of order. He was no longer just a lawyer. He was becoming what Ivanova and the timekeeper had promised. And he was terrified that the next time he remembered the future, it wouldn't be a document. It would be something he couldn't stop. The victory at the deposition catapulted Mark Rossi to a new level. He was no longer just a stellar associate. He was a prophet. Partners clapped him on the shoulder, their smiles a mixture of awe and a new, subtle fear. They didn't know how he'd done it, and Mark had no intention of explaining. He accepted their praise with a cold, hollow core. The win hadn't felt sweet. It tasted like copper and ozone. He hadn't won. He had cheated. He had looked at reality's answer key. He dove deeper into work, trying to use the pressure to hold back the encroaching dread. He increased his nocturne dosage, He needed the focus not just for his job, but to keep the echoes at bay. He found that as long as he was medicated, the reflections stayed in sync. The temporal traces remained quiet. Absolute focus was his cage. He was in his office. It was a Tuesday afternoon. He knew this because his terminal clock read clearly. Tuesday, 16:04. He was reviewing a complex arbitrage contract, the digitized words blurring before him. Though Nocturne gave him mental clarity, his body was paying the price. A deep bone-weary fatigue was setting in. He blinked. The light was wrong. It was no longer the harsh artificial glare of his office. It was the warm amber light of late afternoon, streaming through his apartment window. He was not in his ergonomic chair. He was on his living room floor. His mouth was dry, tasting like ash. The silence was profound. No hum of office servers. Just the faint ticking click of his apartment's radiator. "No," he whispered. This wasn't a minutes-long skip. This was a displacement. He scrambled to his feet. He was still in his suit, but it was rumpled, his tie yanked loose as if he'd slept in it. Or fought in it. His apartment was a wreck. Not burglarized, but ravaged by a localized, violent frenzy. A chair was overturned. The sofa cushions were slashed, white stuffing spilling out. An expensive vase was shattered on the floor. His mind reeled. A break-in? No, the door was locked. From the inside, a cold, granitic horror rose in his throat. I did this. He looked at his watch. The screen was dark, the battery dead. He staggered to his home terminal, slapping the console. The screen flickered to life. Wednesday, 17:07, Mark stopped breathing. He stared at the numbers. Tuesday, 4 p.m. Wednesday, 5 p.m. 25 hours, a full day and an hour carved clean from his life. A massive gaping hole had been punched in his timeline. What had he done? Where had he been? And then he smelled it. A sharp, acrid scent of burned plastic and ozone. It was stronger here, in the kitchen. He walked like a sleepwalker, his feet crunching on the shards of the broken vase. His kitchen, usually sterile, was violated. But it wasn't chaos. It was precise. The access panels for his smart home mainframe were pried open. Wires had been yanked free, and on the white tile floor, directly beneath the main power junction, was a black, star-shaped scorch mark. The edges of the tile had melted, bubbling and black. A small, automated fire suppression nozzle in the ceiling was still dripping chemical foam onto the floor. Fire. His mind didn't jump to the future. Jumped to the past. To the sterile white room at Eterna Labs. To the unfocused eyes of the timekeeper staring through him. "I'm so sorry about the fire." Mark sank against the counter. The words hadn't been a warning. They hadn't been a prophecy. They were an apology. The timekeeper hadn't been warning him of a future fire. He was remembering a fire that, in his own fractured timeline, Mark must have told him about. This fire. The one Mark had no memory of starting. Where had he been for 25 hours? What had he done? Who or what had he been fighting? The fear of the future was replaced by a new, more profound terror. The horror of a past he couldn't access, one he had clearly lived, but not been present for. Panic was a luxury Mark could no longer afford. It was swiftly being replaced by a cold, sharp dread. He was no longer a man living his life. He was an archaeologist piecing together the ruins of his own actions, moments after they happened. The 25-hour gap was a black hole in his mind. He had no idea what he had done or why. He had cleaned up the kitchen, disposed of the scorched components, and filed a false maintenance request for his home terminal. He went back to the office as if nothing had happened, the smell of ozone still clinging to his suit. He was a ghost in his own life. He couldn't trust his past, and he was terrified of his future. He had to know more. He had to see the timekeeper. This time he didn't make an appointment. Late on a Friday night, when the Eterna Labs campus was deep in its artificial slumber, Mark bypassed the minimal security. His position as a high-powered corporate lawyer had given him a working knowledge of security systems, and his nocturne-fueled mind, now honed by a desperate paranoia, saw the flaws in their protocol. He didn't just bypass the alarms. He remembered the security chief's login from a future memory of a meeting that hadn't happened yet. He slipped through the subterranean levels, the sterile white corridors now feeling less like a clinic and more like a mausoleum. He found the timekeeper's room. The door was unlocked. Subject Zero was sitting on the floor just as before. But this time he wasn't staring at the wall. He was staring at the door as if he had been expecting him. "You're late, Mark," the old man whispered, his voice dry. "I thought the fire would have been enough to make you hurry." I lost time," Mark said, his voice hoarse. "I don't remember the fire. I don't remember anything for 25 hours. What did I do?" The timekeeper's unfocused eyes drifted over Mark's shoulder. "You tried to stop it. You tried to pull the plug. You saw what the mainframe was doing, how it was listening. But you weren't strong enough. Not yet. Stop what? What is Ivanova doing?" "She wants the bridge," the old man whispered, leaning forward, a new urgency in his voice. "She doesn't just want us to see. She wants to build a bridge. To what? To them. The ones in the gaps." The timekeeper's face was a mask of primal terror. "I told you. The lost hours, the skips, they aren't empty. They are the space between the ticks of the clock. A different place, a different when, and things live there. They are old, Mark, and they are hungry. They feed on the present." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. This is psychosis. It's a hallucination. You're insane. I'm insane. Am I? The timekeeper looked down at his own frail hands. "I see this conversation, and I see my own birth, and I see the dust on my own coffin all at the same time. It's too much. The human mind wasn't meant to hold it all. It spills over." He looked up, his eyes suddenly terribly clear. "Ivanova doesn't care. She thinks they are angels, gods, a higher dimension. She is using Nocturne to thin the veil, to make our minds into receptors, into doorways. She's using us," Mark whispered, the horrible truth clicking into place. "She's not just observing. She's inviting something. You are the key, Mark. You are the one who is strong enough. Your mind isn't just seeing, it's stabilizing. It's holding the connection." The timekeeper's voice cracked. "You have to stop. You have to fight it. When you see yourself in two places at once. The door is open. The bridge is complete. And they will walk across." A chime echoed from the hallway. A soft clinical sound. A security alert. "She knows you're here," the timekeeper said, his voice fading back into confusion. He frowned, looking at Mark's left arm with a strange, analytical curiosity. "How did your arm feel?" he asked, his voice suddenly distant and conversational. "What? My arm?" Mark looked at his own arm. It was fine. "What do you mean?" But the old man was gone, his consciousness adrift again. He was rocking gently, humming a tune that Mark didn't recognize. The moment of clarity had passed. Mark fled, his mind reeling. A bridge. Doorways. They will walk across. He burst into the main corridor and ran directly into two uniformed security guards. They didn't try to stop him. They simply stood aside. At the end of the hall, Dr. Elena Ivanova was waiting. Her expression was not one of anger, but of mild disappointment, as one would have for a lab rat that had contaminated the experiment. "Your search for answers is premature, Mr. Rossi," she said, her voice like ice. "You are disrupting the protocol." "Protocol?" Mark's voice was a low growl. The lawyer was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "He called it a bridge. He said you were letting things in." Dr. Ivanova's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. It was a cold, clinical expression. "The security detail can leave us. Mr. Rossi is not a physical threat. He is, however, an invaluable asset." The guards nodded, stepping back into the shadows of the corridor with unnerving obedience. "Please, Mark. Back to the observation room," she said. It was not a request. He walked, his body rigid with a fury that was overshadowed only by his terror. He was back in the room with the large screen and the single, complex chair. The door hissed shut behind them, the sound of a closing vault. "He told you about the bridge," Ivanova mused, running her fingers along the console. "His mind is fractured, yes, but his metaphors are unexpectedly poetic. Subject Zero sees the sublime and interprets it as terror. Primitive mind encountering a higher power." "Stop talking in riddles," Mark snapped. "What is the truth? What is this protocol?" Ivanova turned, her pale eyes bright with the fervor of a zealot. "Nocturne was never about sleep, Mark. That was simply the marketing. A clever solution to a biological inconvenience. And a perfect delivery system for the real product." The screen behind her lit up, showing not a brain scan but a complex Rotating tesseract, a four-dimensional cube, folding in on itself in impossible ways. The Ivanova protocol is my life's work. It's based on a simple premise. Consciousness is a prison. We are locked into a single, agonizing slice of now. We see Nocturne not as a drug, but as a key. A universal solvent for the very cement that holds our perception in that linear, pathetic line. You wanted the side effects, Mark whispered, connecting the terrible dots. The skips, the echoes. They are not side effects, she corrected him, her voice sharp. They are the intended effect. They are the sound of the prison bars dissolving. Phase 1 perception was a success. You see the echoes. You remember the future. Your mind is no longer just in time. It is beginning to look at it. And the timekeeper? Subject 0? Mark demanded. What about him? He's a broken wreck. He was a failed prototype, Ivanova said dismissively. His mind was too weak, too unstructured. It glimpsed the true landscape and it shattered, like a glass exposed to a sonic blast. But yours, she stepped closer, her gaze intensely analytical. Your mind, Mark, so structured, so ambitious, so desperate for control. It didn't shatter. It's adapting. It is becoming the first stable receptor. A receptor. For what? For the higher dimensional reality, she said, her voice dropping. The gaps he babbles about are the spaces between the ticks of the clock. The true, unfiltered, non-linear cosmos. He sees monsters because he is small, and he is afraid. I see. The next stage of human evolution. Gods, if you will. And you, Mark. You are the telephone. You are the conduit. A horrifying synthesis of her words and the timekeeper's warning exploded in his mind. The bridge. The doorway. They will walk across. You're insane. You're trying to let things into our world. I am trying to let us into theirs, she countered. And you are the one who will hold the door open. Mark lunged for the door panel, slapping it with his palm. It didn't budge. I'm done. I'm stopping the drug. You can't keep me here. I'll stop. Ivanova watched him, her expression unchanging. Stop? Mr. Rossi, you haven't been free since you took the first pill. You've already experienced the withdrawal. That was merely your body protesting. Imagine what happens when your mind, a mind now fundamentally rewired to perceive 4 dimensions, is suddenly starved of the chemical that makes it possible. She let the silence hang. Cold and heavy. It won't just be agonizing, Mark. It will be an extinction. Your consciousness, stretched thin across all of time, will snap. You will cease to be. You are trapped, not by me, but by your own expanded perception. She gestured to the complex chair in the center of the room. You are not my patient. You are my protocol, and you are here for your final calibration. The stress of your excursion has accelerated the process. You are almost ready. No. Mark backed away from the chair, his hands raised. No calibration. No protocol. I'm not your damn bridge. Your cooperation is irrelevant, Ivanova said. She didn't move toward him. She didn't have to. She tapped a command into her console. The lights in the room dimmed. A low, penetrating hum, so low it was felt more than heard, vibrated through the floor. It was the same frequency as the temporal drag he'd felt during his withdrawal, but amplified, weaponized. The chair in the center of the room began to glow with a soft blue light. It wasn't a chair. It was an antenna, an amplifier. Mark staggered, clutching his head. The drug in his system, the Nocturne, resonated with the sound. His perception, already fragile, began to buckle. The stress of your panic. It's the final catalyst, Ivanova's voice said, sounding distant, though she was only feet away. We are not opening the door, Mark. We are simply holding it open for you. You are the one who will walk through, the echoes started. Not the subtle, shimmering traces he was used to. This was violent. He saw a dozen versions of himself throw his hands to his head. He saw himself lunge for the console, only to be thrown back by a force he couldn't see. His vision fractured, splitting into a mosaic of past, present, and future. He was in his office signing the merger. He was in his apartment, watching the fire bloom from the wall socket. He was in this room, screaming. He was somewhere else, a place of cold, impossible angles and screaming, silent light. The mind is stabilizing. Ivanova's voice was electric with triumph. The connection is forming! Stop it! Mark roared, the words ripping from his throat. He tried to focus, to ground himself in the now. He stared at the far wall, breathing hard, fighting the temporal storm that was trying to tear his consciousness apart. The hum stopped. The chaos receded. The echoes snapped back into place. Silence. Mark stood panting, his suit soaked in sweat. He was still in the room. Ivanova was still by her console, watching him. He wasn't alone. Across the room, standing near the blue, glowing antenna, was another man. It was not an echo. It was not a ghost. It was solid. It was breathing. It was him. This other Mark was identical in every way, wearing the same rumpled suit, the same terrified, sweat-sheened expression. This was not a pre-action from a second in the future. This was a physical, separate instance of himself, coexisting in the same space. Mark stared, his mind unable to process the paradox. The timekeeper's final, desperate warning echoed in his skull. When you see yourself in two places, the door is open. The other Mark, the duplicate, slowly turned its head. It looked at Mark, but its eyes were not terrified. As Mark watched, the terror in the duplicate's eyes faded, replaced by something else, something cold, something ancient, something utterly, terrifyingly empty. This was not him. This was a vessel, the bridge, Ivanova whispered, her voice filled with a holy, terrible awe. It's complete. The duplicate, the other, slowly, deliberately raised its right arm. It looked at its own hand, flexing its fingers, as if testing a new, unfamiliar limb. Then it looked back at Mark and it smiled. Mark stared at his double, the thing wearing his face, the thing that was not him but was standing in his reality. The bridge was complete, the door was open, and something had walked across. The other Mark, the overlap, was still holding its right arm up, examining it with a cold, detached curiosity. It looked at Mark and its empty smile widened. How did your arm feel? The voice was not his. It was a dry, layered whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was the timekeeper's voice coming from his mouth. What? Mark whispered, his mind recoiling from the impossibility. The overlap ignored the question. It turned its gaze from Mark to the glowing blue antenna. It took a single, fluid step toward the main control console where Dr. Ivanova stood watching, her face a mask of ecstatic triumph. It's beautiful, she breathed. The convergence, the overlap reached out its hand not toward Ivanova, but toward the console itself. Its fingers aimed at a junction box marked high voltage. No! Mark screamed, though he didn't know why. He lunged forward, tackling his own double. It was like tackling a statue of cold iron. The overlap didn't move, but the impact threw Mark backward. He scrambled to his feet, his mind screaming at the paradox of his own failed attack. The overlap slowly turned its head back to him. It looked at Mark, then at Mark's left arm, and then back at the console. It was giving him a choice. I'm so sorry about the fire, it whispered again in the timekeeper's voice. Mark's blood ran cold. He remembered the scorched, melted panel in his apartment. He remembered the old man's words. This was it. The moment. As the overlap turned back to the console, Mark lunged again, but not at his double. He threw himself at the console, pushing Ivanova aside and slamming his hand over the junction box, trying to shield it. The overlap's hand, the hand of his future empty self, slammed down onto his hand. The world exploded. It was not a sound. It was a white, silent scream of pure energy. Thousands of volts surged from the console, not into the machine but into him. The energy was a fire, a liquid sun devouring his arm. The smell of burning plastic and his own flesh filled the air. Through the blinding, agonizing pain, Mark looked up. The overlap was still standing there, watching him. Its right arm was raised, and now Mark could see it clearly. The sleeve was burned away, the flesh beneath it a map of charred, weeping burns. It was his arm. His future arm. He looked down at his own left arm, which was now a blackened, smoking ruin, the pain and abstract, distant galaxy. He looked back at his future self. He had caused the fire in his apartment trying to stop the system. He had met the timekeeper. He had been warned. He had come here. He had seen himself. He had burned his arm to stop his double. only to become the double he was trying to stop. The loop was closed. He locked eyes with his future self. The empty smile was still there, and in that instant the final barrier of his mind, the last thin wall separating now from then, dissolved. His consciousness didn't just splinter, it detonated. He was in the lab, his arm a column of fire. He was in his office, tasting the metallic tang of Nocturne for the first time. He was in his apartment, 25 hours missing, smelling the ozone he had just created. He was at the deposition, remembering the red folder. He was a child, learning to tell time. He was an old man lying in a coffin, watching the dust motes swirl in the light of a church window he didn't recognize. He was in the cold, impossible space between the seconds, and the things that lived there turned their ancient, hungry faces toward him. He was everywhere. He was everyone, and therefore he was nowhere, he was no one. Mark Rossi ceased to be. The empty vessel that was his body slumped to the floor, the connection severed. The overlap, the future Mark, shimmered like heat haze and vanished. Dr. Elena Ivanova stood in the echoing silence, breathing hard. She looked at the smoking, unmoving body on the floor. She adjusted her lab coat, her expression not one of horror but of absolute divine success. She walked over to her console and tapped a button. "The protocol is a success," she said, her voice clear and strong, speaking to the recorders. "The bridge is stable. Subject has expired. But the doorway is wide open. Thank you for experiencing Chronosomnia. Your attention is the energy that fuels this channel. If this story fractured your sense of time, please consider supporting us. Like, subscribe, and share this narrative with others who dare to question reality. Your support allows us to continue building new worlds and exploring the unsettling corridors of the human mind. More nightmares are waiting to be dreamt.